There's a woman whose face has sold more magazines than anyone else in the past 20 years. Lips that became a global standard. Eyes that hypnotized entire audiences. A body sculpted by genetics and worshipped by millions. But that same body, revered, photographed, insured by corporations, hides something nobody sees on magazine covers. Scars from blades she dragged across her own skin. Double mastectomy at 38. Complete removal of ovaries. Bell's palsy that paralyzed half of the most famous face on the planet. The woman the world crowned as the ultimate symbol of beauty spent decades fighting not to be killed by her own body. She was once Hollywood's highest-paid actress, commanded $20 million per film, built a humanitarian empire that moved nations, created a family of 6 children from 4 continents, the perfect portrait of love without borders. And then everything collapsed. A violent incident at 30,000 feet. A divorce that exploded into global headlines. A legal battle spanning 9 years that still hasn't ended. Children who erased their father's last name. A French chateau that became a battlefield, over $800 million. How did the little girl abandoned by her father at 1 year old, the one who grew up cutting her own skin in dark bedrooms, transform into the most desired woman in the world? Why did she remove body parts that millions envied? What really happened on that plane that destroyed Brangelina? And why, in 2025, is she alone, watching her children leave, while still fighting in courtrooms against the man who promised to love her forever? But before we understand the present, we need to go back in time. Because Angelina Jolie's story doesn't begin with red carpets. It begins with the thunderous sound of a family shattering before the eyes of a child who couldn't even speak yet. The divorce didn't just end a marriage. It detonated Angelina's childhood. While other kids played with dolls, she learned to navigate the wreckage of adult warfare. John Voight didn't simply leave, he vanished. Birthdays passed without calls. Christmas mornings arrived without his presence. The man whose face filled movie screens was absent from the one screen that mattered most: his daughter's life. Marceline tried to fill the void, pouring every ounce of love into Angelina and her brother James. But love, however fierce, cannot replace the ghost of a father who chose not to stay. Angelina grew up watching her mother work multiple jobs, sacrifice her own dreams, and quietly absorb the pain of raising 2 children alone in a city that worshipped the very man who had abandoned them. Money was tight. While John lived in luxury, Marceline struggled. They moved repeatedly, bouncing between modest apartments, always one step away from financial collapse. Angelina later recalled shopping at thrift stores, watching her mother count pennies, understanding even as a child that her father's absence wasn't just emotional, it was financial abandonment. School offered no refuge. At Beverly Hills High School, surrounded by the children of Hollywood royalty, Angelina stood out for all the wrong reasons. Too tall, too thin, lips too full, features too sharp. Classmates mocked her appearance. Boys ignored her. Girls whispered behind her back. The girl who would one day be crowned the world's most beautiful woman spent her teenage years feeling like a freak. "I was the weird kid nobody wanted to sit with," she admitted years later, her voice still carrying the sting of those memories. But the cruelty of peers was nothing compared to the war raging inside her own skin. By age 14, Angelina had discovered a terrifying way to convert emotional agony into something she could control: physical pain. She began cutting herself, dragging razor blades across her arms, her thighs, anywhere she could hide the evidence. Each cut was a release, a scream her voice couldn't make, a way to punish the body that felt so wrong, so unlovable, so cursed by the beauty that brought only unwanted attention. She kept a collection of knives hidden in her room. At night, alone, she would press steel against flesh and feel, paradoxically, relief. "It was the only way I felt real," she later confessed in interviews that stunned the world. "The only way I felt anything at all." Her mother discovered the scars but felt powerless to stop it. Therapy helped, but barely. The cutting continued sporadically into her 20s, a dark ritual that surfaced whenever the pain became unbearable. Even as she walked red carpets, even as magazines proclaimed her beauty, Angelina carried those scars hidden beneath designer gowns, permanent reminders of the war she fought against herself. At 16, she entered into a relationship that should have been impossible. She moved in with her boyfriend and began a sexual relationship so intense, so consuming, that it bordered on self-destruction. She described their connection as practicing dying together, a chilling phrase that revealed how deeply she romanticized pain, how completely she had confused love with suffering. The relationship was toxic, volatile, fueled by rage and desperation. They fought viciously. They reconciled desperately. And through it all, Angelina learned a devastating lesson: that love, for her, would always feel like violence. That intimacy would always taste like blood. By the time the relationship ended at 18, she was emotionally shattered. She had dropped out of formal high school, completed her diploma through correspondence, and enrolled at the Lee Strasberg Theater Institute, not out of passion, but out of a desperate need to become anyone other than herself. Acting wasn't an escape, it was survival. On stage, she could inhabit other people's pain instead of her own. She could scream, cry, bleed, and call it performance. The irony was brutal. The same emotional damage that nearly destroyed her became the very fuel that made her acting devastatingly authentic. But even as her talent began to emerge, even as casting directors noticed her raw intensity, Angelina remained trapped in the shadow of her father's legacy. Jon Voight's name opened doors, but it also became a constant reminder of what she lacked. Every audition carried the whispered question, is she here because of talent or because of her last name? She resented the connection. She resented him. And yet, she couldn't fully sever it. Years later, she would admit, I both hated my father and desperately wanted him to be proud of me. That contradiction nearly destroyed me. Her early 20s were a blur of small roles, failed auditions, and self-destructive spirals. She dyed her hair black, wore only black clothing, collected knives, and cultivated an image of darkness that both intrigued and terrified Hollywood. She wasn't playing the game. She was daring the industry to reject her before she rejected herself. And then, in 1995, something shifted. She landed the lead role in Hackers, a cyberpunk thriller that flopped commercially but introduced the world to a new kind of actress. Dangerous, unpredictable, magnetic. The film's failure didn't matter. What mattered was that Angelina Jolie had finally been seen. But being seen, as she would soon discover, was its own kind of curse. The world was about to fall in love with her face, and that love would become the cruelest trap of all. Fame arrived not with grace, but with chaos. By the late 1990s, Angelina Jolie had become Hollywood's most dangerous commodity. Talented enough to command attention, reckless enough to destroy herself in full public view. The industry didn't know whether to crown her or institutionalize her. Her breakthrough came in 1998 with Gia, an HBO film about a supermodel who died of AIDS at 26. Angelina didn't just play Gia Karangi, she became her, channeling every ounce of her own self-destruction into a performance so raw it felt like watching someone bleed on camera. Critics were stunned. She won a Golden Globe. But the cost was invisible. To access that level of pain, Angelina had to reopen every wound she'd spent years trying to close. The following year brought Girl, Interrupted, the role that would change everything. Playing Lisa Rowe, a charismatic sociopath in a psychiatric ward, Angelina delivered a performance of such ferocity that it overshadowed even Winona Ryder, the film's star. At the 2000 Academy Awards, she won Best Supporting Actress. At 24 years old, she stood on that stage, clutching her Oscar, and shocked the world by kissing her brother James on the lips. A moment that would haunt her reputation for years. "I was so in love with my brother," she said later, trying to explain the inexplicable. But Hollywood doesn't forgive strange behavior, even from Oscar winners. The kiss became tabloid ammunition, the first of many moments that painted Angelina as unhinged, dangerous, someone to be watched but never trusted. But that was nothing compared to what came next. In 2000, on the set of Gone in 60 Seconds, Angelina met Billy Bob Thornton, a man 20 years her senior, already engaged to actress Laura Dern. The attraction was instant and all-consuming. Within months, Billy Bob had broken his engagement, and he and Angelina married in a Las Vegas ceremony so spontaneous that even their families weren't invited. What followed was a relationship that became a media circus. They wore vials of each other's blood around their necks. They spoke graphically about their sex life in interviews. They covered themselves in matching tattoos. Billy Bob's name was inked across Angelina's shoulder. They adopted a son from Cambodia together, naming him Maddox. To the world, it looked like madness. To Angelina, it felt like the first time someone had matched her intensity, her willingness to dive into the abyss without hesitation. "We were perfect for each other in all the worst ways," she later admitted. But beneath the theatrics lay something darker. Angelina's continued battle with self-harm, her experimentation with drugs, her admission that she had hired a hitman to kill her during this period because she didn't have the courage to do it myself. The hitman, she claimed, talked her out of it, suggesting she wait a month to see if she still felt the same way. By the time the month passed, she had decided to live. That story, whether entirely true or partially myth, revealed the terrifying depths of her despair. This was not a woman playing at darkness for publicity. This was someone genuinely wrestling with whether life was worth continuing. The marriage to Billy Bob lasted 3 years, crumbling under the weight of their combined chaos. In 2003, they separated quietly, and Angelina later admitted, "I realized I needed to survive, and I couldn't do that while drowning with someone else." See, by her late 20s, Angelina had collected almost every warning label Hollywood could assign: homewrecker, blood drinker, drug user, mentally unstable, sexually deviant. She was box office gold and reputational poison simultaneously. Studios wanted her talent, but feared her unpredictability. And then, in the wreckage of her failed marriage and public disgrace, something extraordinary happened. Angelina looked at her adopted son Maddox, barely 2 years old, and realized he was watching her destroy herself. That tiny boy, who had survived an orphanage in Cambodia, deserved better than a mother spiraling toward oblivion. For the first time in her life, Angelina Jolie decided to fight not for death, but for life. Not for herself, but for him. The wilderness years were ending. Rebirth was about to begin. Motherhood didn't arrive gently. It detonated Angelina's world with the force of a second birth, not of a child, but of herself. In 2002, While filming Lara Croft, Tomb Raider in Cambodia, Angelina visited an orphanage in Battambang. Among dozens of malnourished children, one 7-month-old boy locked eyes with her. His name was Rath Vibol. Within months, he became Maddox Jolie. The adoption wasn't a celebrity publicity stunt. It was an act of desperation from a woman who had spent 27 years searching for a reason to stay alive. "Maddox saved my life," she would later confess, her voice breaking. "I didn't adopt him. He adopted me." For the first time, Angelina had something she couldn't destroy, betray, or abandon. A tiny human who depended entirely on her survival. The knives stayed in their drawers. The drugs disappeared. The reckless relationships ended. Overnight, the woman who had romanticized death became fiercely protective of life. Not her own, but his. But motherhood also opened her eyes to a world she'd been too consumed by her own pain to see. Cambodia wasn't just where she found Maddox. It was where she witnessed landmine victims, child prostitution, and poverty so crushing it made her Hollywood problems feel obscene. She began asking questions. Why are there millions of orphans? Why do children die from diseases that cost pennies to prevent? Why does the world look away? In 2001, even before Maddox's adoption was finalized, Angelina was appointed a UNHCR Goodwill Ambassador. It wasn't a ceremonial role. She traveled to Sierra Leone, Tanzania, Pakistan, and Kosovo, not for photo ops, but for weeks at a time, sitting in refugee camps, holding dying children, listening to women who had survived atrocities she couldn't fathom. The tabloids mocked her. "Angelina's playing Mother Teresa," they sneered. Critics accused her of using charity to rehabilitate her damaged reputation. But those who traveled with her saw something different. A woman genuinely transformed, channeling the same intensity that once fueled self-destruction into something resembling redemption. She donated millions. She established foundations. She met with presidents and warlords, using her celebrity as a weapon to force the world to pay attention. "I can't change my past," she told one journalist, "but I can use my platform to change someone's future." In 2005, she adopted again, this time Zahara, a 6-month-old girl from Ethiopia suffering from malnutrition and dehydration. Angelina brought her back to the United States, nursed her to health, and watched her transform from a skeletal infant into a thriving child. The press coverage was relentless, but Angelina had learned to weaponize attention. Every photo of Zahara became a reminder of the millions of children still suffering. Then came 2006, and everything changed again. On the set of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Angelina met Brad Pitt, Hollywood's golden boy, America's most eligible bachelor, and, at the time, married to Jennifer Aniston. The chemistry was undeniable, explosive, dangerous. And once again, Angelina found herself at the center of a scandal that threatened to consume her. When Brad and Jennifer's marriage ended in early 2005, the world placed the blame squarely on Angelina. She was the homewrecker, the seductress, the woman who destroyed America's sweetheart. The tabloids crucified her. Team Aniston merchandise flooded stores. Death threats arrived by the thousands. But by then, Angelina had learned to endure hatred. She refused to discuss the affair publicly, maintaining a dignified silence even as the world screamed for her confession. Years later, she would only say, "Not all relationships end for one reason, but I will not apologize for falling in love." What mattered more than the scandal was what came next. Brad embraced not just Angelina, but her mission. He traveled with her to refugee camps. He adopted Maddox and Zahara as his own children. Together, they became something unprecedented. A power couple using their combined star power for humanitarian work while building a family that defied traditional boundaries. In May 2006, Angelina gave birth to Shiloh in Namibia, selling the first photos to People magazine for $4.1 million, every penny donated to charity. The message was clear. Even her children's images were currency for good. In 2007, they adopted Pax from Vietnam. In 2008, twins Knox and Vivian were born in France. Their photos sold for $14 million, again donated entirely. 6 children, 3 adopted, 3 biological, from 4 continents. The Jolie Pitt family became a living symbol of multiculturalism, of chosen family, of love transcending borders. For a brief, shining moment, Angelina had everything. A partner who matched her ambition, a family she had built from the ruins of her own broken childhood, and a purpose that made the pain of her past feel almost worthwhile. She had transformed from Hollywood's wildest liability into its most respected humanitarian. From the woman who once hired a hitman to the woman who saved lives. But empires, even those built on love, are fragile. And the higher they rise, the more devastating the fall. From 2005 to 2014, Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt didn't just dominate Hollywood. They redefined what celebrity power could accomplish. They were Brangelina, a single entity more valuable than the sum of its parts, a brand worth hundreds of millions, a couple whose every photograph could sell magazines, crash websites, and move global conversations. At their peak, they were untouchable. Brad was still the golden boy heartthrob who could open any film. Angelina had evolved from controversial actress into global icon, Academy Award winner, humanitarian, mother of 6, and arguably the most famous woman on the planet. Together, they commanded $20 million per film each, their combined net worth climbing toward $500 million. Their chateau in the south of France, Chateau Miraval, became the symbol of their empire. 35 rooms, vineyards producing award-winning rosé, a moat, private forests. It was a fairy tale made tangible. Paparazzi camped outside for weeks, hoping to capture a single image of the family that tabloids would pay 6 figures to print. But unlike other celebrity couples who hoarded their privilege, Brangelina weaponized their fame for good. They didn't just write checks, they showed up. In 2006, they traveled to Haiti, Pakistan, and Chad, dragging international media attention to crises the world had ignored. When Angelina spoke at the UN, world leaders listened. When Brad toured post-Katrina New Orleans, reconstruction funds followed. Their 2008 wedding was the most anticipated event in Hollywood. Except it didn't happen. For years, they refused to marry, with Angelina famously stating, "We won't marry until everyone in America has the right to marry," a reference to the fight for marriage equality. It was a principled stand that only amplified their moral authority. Meanwhile, their family grew into something unprecedented. 6 children from different continents, each one doted on, each one raised to speak multiple languages, to understand privilege as responsibility. Maddox, Pax, Zahara, Shiloh, Knox, and Vivian weren't just celebrity children. They were a living statement about chosen family, about erasing borders, about rejecting the narrow definitions of what family could look like. Angelina directed her first film, In the Land of Blood and Honey, about the Bosnian War. Critics praised its unflinching brutality. She executive produced documentaries about refugees. She wrote op-eds in the New York Times about sexual violence in conflict zones. She wasn't playing activist. She had become one, using her Oscar pedigree to to force difficult conversations into mainstream discourse. Brad, meanwhile, founded the Make It Right Foundation, building 150 sustainable homes in New Orleans' lower 9th Ward. He produced Best Picture winners. He appeared in Chanel ads worth millions, donating his entire fee to charity. Together, they were cinema royalty with a conscience impossible to dismiss as shallow or self-serving. But beneath the glossy surface, cracks were forming. The pressure of maintaining the perfect family while living under constant surveillance took its toll. Every vacation was stalked by paparazzi. Every school run photographed. Every argument potentially leaked to tabloids. They couldn't walk their own property without drones hovering overhead. Their children couldn't play without telephoto lenses capturing every moment. Brad later admitted he was drinking heavily, using substances to cope with the suffocating pressure. Angelina was working compulsively, directing films, flying to war zones, managing 6 children's schedules, attending UN meetings, a pace that would break most people. Friends noticed they were rarely in the same country anymore, their lives running on parallel tracks that no longer intersected. And then came 2013, the year everything shifted. Angelina discovered she carried the BRCA1 gene mutation, which gave her an 87% chance of developing breast cancer and a 50% chance of ovarian cancer. Her mother, Marceline, had died of ovarian cancer in 2007 at just 56 years old. Angelina had watched her mother's body betray her, had held her hand through chemo, had witnessed the slow, agonizing defeat. Now that same genetic lottery had handed Angelina the same loaded gun. In May 2013, she underwent a preventive double mastectomy, having both breasts removed and reconstructed. She announced it publicly in a New York Times op-ed titled "My Medical Choice," instantly sparking a global conversation about genetic testing, preventive surgery, and women's health. The Angelina effect was real. BRCA testing requests spiked by 64% worldwide. Brad stood by her through the surgeries, the recovery, the fear. He was there for every moment, she said. I couldn't have done it without him. But the procedures changed her. Not just physically, but psychologically. The body that had been worshipped, fetishized, and monetized for decades was now scarred, altered, no longer entirely her own. She felt, as she later described, less feminine, less whole. In 2015, she underwent another surgery, removal of her ovaries and fallopian tubes, throwing her into early menopause at just 39 years old. The hormonal chaos compounded the emotional weight. She struggled with hot flashes, mood swings, and the devastating finality of never being able to carry another child. The world saw courage. Magazine covers proclaimed her a hero. But in private, Angelina was grieving the loss of parts of herself she could never reclaim. And through it all, the distance between her and Brad grew wider. By 2014, they finally married at Chateau Miraval in a private ceremony, their children's artwork decorating Angelina's veil. The world celebrated. But those closest to them saw what the cameras couldn't. Two people who had built an empire together, but were slowly, painfully, drifting apart. The fairy tale was ending. The collapse was about to begin. September 14th, 2016. A private plane carrying the Jolie Pitt family from France to Los Angeles became the site of an incident so explosive it would detonate their empire in a single afternoon. What happened on that flight remains disputed. Shrouded in conflicting accounts, sealed FBI reports, and the trauma of children who witnessed their family shatter at 30,000 feet. According to reports that leaked in the weeks following, Brad and Angelina argued violently. Maddox, their eldest son at 15, intervened to defend his mother. Brad allegedly lunged at the boy. Angelina threw herself between them. The plane, once a symbol of their wealth and freedom, became a prison of rage and fear as their 6 children watched their parents destroy each other. 5 days later, Angelina filed for divorce. The announcement hit like a bomb. Brangelina split dominated every headline, crashed tabloid websites, and sent shockwaves through an industry that had believed them invincible. But Angelina wasn't filing quietly. She cited irreconcilable differences and requested sole physical custody of the children, a move that signaled this wasn't an amicable separation. It was war. Within hours, the FBI and Los Angeles County Department of Children and Family Services launched investigations into the plane incident. Brad was accused of child abuse. Anonymous sources leaked claims he had been verbally abusive and physical with Maddox. The media, which had once celebrated Brad as America's most beloved father, now painted him as a monster. Brad released a statement. "I am very saddened by this, but what matters most now is the well-being of our kids." Angelina's team responded icily. This decision was made for the health of the family. The investigations eventually cleared Brad of criminal wrongdoing, but the damage was irreversible. Maddox, who had idolized his father, now refused to speak to him. The boy who Brad had adopted, raised, and loved as his own son had become unreachable, his loyalty firmly with Angelina. What followed was a legal battle so vicious it would drag on for 8 years and counting. Custody hearings, sealed documents, accusations of parental alienation, fights over Chateau Miraval, their French estate, which became a symbol of their union and now a battlefield over assets worth hundreds of millions. Brad accused Angelina of deliberately turning the children against him. Court filings claimed she encouraged them to avoid him during custody visits, that she spoke negatively about him in their presence, that she weaponized their love to punish him. His lawyers argued she was systematically erasing him from their lives. Angelina's team fired back. Brad's drinking had been out of control for years. His temper was unpredictable. The plane incident wasn't an isolated event. It was the culmination of behavior the children had witnessed for too long. She wasn't alienating them. She was protecting them. The truth, buried beneath legal motions and PR spin, was likely more complex. 2 people who had loved fiercely now fought with equal ferocity, and their children were caught in the crossfire. Publicly, both maintained careful silence, releasing only vague statements about focusing on the children's well-being. But privately, the war raged. Every custody hearing leaked to tabloids. Every court filing dissected by legal analysts. Every rare photograph of Brad with the younger children analyzed for signs of reconciliation or estrangement. The children themselves became pawns. Maddox, once photographed laughing with Brad on red carpets, now refused to see him entirely. Pax, the second oldest, reportedly sided with his brother and mother. Zahara chose to drop Pitt from her name, styling herself as simply Zahara Jolie when she enrolled at Spelman College. Shiloh, their first biological child together, filed legal paperwork on her 18th birthday to officially remove Pitt from her name. The symbolism was devastating. The daughter they had created together, whose birth had been celebrated globally, now legally severing herself from her father's identity. Only the youngest twins, Knox and Vivian, still maintained some relationship with Brad, though even that was strained, limited to supervised visits and carefully negotiated schedules. For Angelina, the divorce meant losing more than a partner. It meant the collapse of the family she had spent 15 years building, the multi-continental symbol of chosen love that had defined her identity. The woman who had transformed herself through motherhood now watched helplessly as that family fractured along fault lines she couldn't repair. But she refused to back down. In court filings, she detailed years of pain, Brad's substance abuse, his anger, moments where she feared for her safety and the children's. She claimed she had tried for years to hold the family together, that she had begged him to get help, that the plane incident was merely the moment she finally accepted she couldn't fix him. Brad's version painted her as controlling, vindictive, someone who couldn't tolerate any narrative she didn't control. He claimed he had been sober for years since the incident, that he had done everything asked of him: therapy, anger management, sobriety programs, and still she blocked his access to their children. The legal bills climbed into the millions. Chateau Miraval, once the site of their wedding, became the subject of a separate lawsuit. Angelina sold her stake to a Russian oligarch without Brad's consent, a move he claimed violated their agreement. She countered that he had tried to force her into signing a non-disclosure agreement about his behavior as a condition of the sale. Their love story, which had once been Hollywood's greatest fairy tale, had curdled into its ugliest divorce. And unlike other celebrity splits that fade from headlines, this one refused to end. 8 years later, in 2024, they were still in court, still fighting, still destroying each other through lawyers and leaked documents. The empire they built together, the humanitarian work, the blended family, the global icon status, had collapsed into rubble. And standing in the wreckage were 6 children who had lost not just one parent, but the only version of family they had ever known. For Angelina, the woman who had spent her life fighting to survive her own demons, this was a different kind of battle. One where there were no winners, only casualties. While her marriage collapsed in courtrooms and tabloids, Angelina faced a quieter, more intimate war, one waged inside her own body. The same genetics that had given her the face that launched 1 billion magazine covers had also handed her a death sentence written in her DNA. The BRCA1 gene mutation is merciless. It doesn't care about beauty, wealth, or fame. It simply calculates probability. 87% chance of breast cancer, 50% chance of ovarian cancer. Angelina had watched this lottery destroy her mother. Marceline Bertram had fought ovarian cancer for nearly 8 years before dying in 2007 at 56. Her body ravaged, her final years stolen by a disease coded into her cells before she was born. Now Angelina carried the same code, the same ticking clock. In February 2013, doctors presented her with an impossible choice: wait and hope the cancer never comes, undergoing constant screenings and living in perpetual fear, or undergo radical preventive surgery, removing healthy breasts before they could betray her. She chose the knife. Over 3 months, Angelina underwent a double mastectomy, both breasts removed, tissue replaced with implants, nipples reconstructed. The surgeries were brutal. Recovery was agonizing. But the statistics shifted dramatically. Her breast cancer risk dropped from 87% to less than 5%. She announced the decision in a New York Times op-ed, stunning the world with her candor. "I wanted to write this to tell other women that the decision to have a mastectomy was not easy. But it is one I am very happy that I made," she wrote. "I do not feel any less of a woman. I feel empowered that I made a strong choice that in no way diminishes my femininity." The world applauded her courage. The Angelina effect sent women flooding into genetic testing centers. She became a symbol of proactive health, of refusing to be a victim of genetics. But privately, The surgeries shattered something inside her. The breasts that had been photographed, worshipped, and objectified for decades were gone, replaced with reconstructed facsimiles that looked right but felt wrong. She struggled with phantom sensations, with the numbness where feeling used to be, with the psychological weight of losing body parts that society had taught her defined her worth as a woman. Brad stood by her through the surgeries. He held her hand through recovery. He told her she was beautiful, but she couldn't feel beautiful. She felt mutilated, necessary though it was. And then, 2 years later, the genetic lottery demanded another sacrifice. In 2015, doctors discovered a small benign tumor on one of her ovaries. It was harmless, but it was a warning. With her BRCA1 mutation, ovarian cancer was nearly inevitable. The same disease that had killed her mother was coming for her. She scheduled immediate surgery, complete removal of her ovaries and fallopian tubes. The operation was successful. Her ovarian cancer risk plummeted. But the cost was immediate and devastating. Surgical menopause at 39 years old. Overnight, her body was thrown into hormonal chaos. Hot flashes that left her drenched in sweat. Mood swings that felt like drowning. Bone density loss, insomnia, and the crushing finality: she could never carry another child. "I feel feminine, and I feel like a woman," she wrote in another op-ed. But friends noticed the toll. Her frame grew thinner. Her face, once full and radiant, became gaunt. The sparkle in her eyes, that magnetic energy that had captivated millions, seemed dimmed. She tried hormone replacement therapy to manage the symptoms, but it brought its own complications. Every solution created new problems. Her body, which had once been her greatest asset, now felt like an enemy she couldn't escape. Then, in 2016, the same year her marriage exploded, her body delivered another blow. She developed Bell's palsy, a condition that paralyzed half her face. The woman whose face had been insured for millions, whose every expression had been analyzed and adored, suddenly couldn't control her own smile. The paralysis was temporary, lasting several months, but the psychological impact was permanent. Sometimes women in families put themselves last until it manifests itself in their own health, she later admitted, connecting the stress of her disintegrating marriage to her physical collapse. She also revealed she suffered from hypertension, dangerously high blood pressure that required daily medication and constant monitoring. The woman who had survived childhood trauma, addiction, and self-harm was now battling her own cardiovascular system. By 2017, tabloids published photos that shocked the world. Angelina Jolie, once Hollywood's symbol of untouchable beauty, now skeletal, her frame barely 90 pounds. Rumors of anorexia, cancer, and imminent death swirled. Her team denied everything, but the photos told their own story. A body pushed beyond its limits, a woman running on fumes. She later admitted the truth was simpler and sadder. She had stopped eating properly because she was too stressed, too heartbroken, too consumed by the divorce and her children's pain to care for herself. The irony was cruel. Angelina had fought so hard to prevent cancer, undergoing surgeries that mutilated her body to save her life. But in surviving the genetic war, she had nearly destroyed herself anyway. Not through disease, but through the stress of simply trying to hold everything together. Her body, once worshipped as perfection, had become a battlefield, and she was losing. January 27, 2007. Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, Los Angeles. Angelina sat beside her mother's hospital bed, holding a hand that had held hers through every childhood nightmare, every teenage crisis, every dark moment when survival felt impossible. Marceline Bertrand, only 56 years old, was dying. Ovarian cancer had ravaged her for nearly 8 years. Chemotherapy had stolen her hair, her strength, her dignity. But in those final hours, none of that mattered. What mattered was that the woman who had sacrificed everything, her acting career, her financial security, her own dreams, to raise Angelina and James alone, was slipping away. Marceline had been more than a mother. She had been Angelina's first protector, the one who stayed when Jon Voight left, who worked multiple jobs to keep them fed, who never once made her children feel like burdens even when money was impossibly tight. She was the reason Angelina survived childhood, the reason she found acting, the reason she learned that love, real love, meant showing up even when it hurt. When Marceline died that winter morning, Angelina didn't just lose her mother. She lost her anchor, her moral compass, the one person who had loved her unconditionally through every scandal, every mistake, every public crucifixion. She later admitted, "Nothing prepares you for that loss. Nothing." The grief was so overwhelming she could barely function. She threw herself into work, into her children, into humanitarian missions, anything to avoid sitting still with the pain. But Marceline's death also planted a seed of something unexpected: forgiveness. For decades, Angelina had carried her hatred of Jon Voight like armor. He was the father who abandoned them, the man who chose fame over family, whose absence had shaped every broken piece of her identity. In 2002, their estrangement had become public when Voight told Access Hollywood that Angelina had serious mental problems, a betrayal so profound that she legally dropped Voight from her professional name, becoming simply Angelina Jolie. They didn't speak for 6 years, but watching her mother die, Angelina began to understand something she had resisted her entire life. Time doesn't wait for reconciliation. Grudges are luxuries the dying don't have, and Jon Voight, despite everything, was still her father. In 2009, 2 years after Marceline's death, they began speaking again, tentatively, carefully. Not with grand apologies or tearful reunions, but with the slow, painful work of two damaged people trying to find common ground. By 2010, Jon was photographing premieres with Angelina again, meeting his grandchildren, attempting to rebuild what had been destroyed. It wasn't a fairy tale reconciliation. Too much had been broken. But it was something, a truce, a willingness to stop punishing each other for the past. Angelina later reflected, "Life is short. Death is permanent. I didn't want to waste what little time we had left." The reconciliation was imperfect, fragile, and incomplete. Jon would never be the father she needed as a child, but he could be present for the woman she had become. And sometimes, in the wreckage of what should have been, that has to be enough. Marceline's death taught Angelina 2 lessons she carried forward: that love requires showing up even when it's hard, and that forgiveness, real forgiveness, is not about erasing the past, but refusing to let it poison the future. But those lessons, powerful as they were, couldn't prepare her for the battles still ahead. In 2025, Angelina Jolie stands at 49 years old, not as the untouchable icon who once ruled red carpets, but as a woman profoundly reshaped by survival, scars, and the brutal education that comes from losing everything you thought defined you. She lives quietly now, primarily in Los Angeles, in a sprawling $25 million estate she purchased after the divorce. The home is fortress-like, designed not for glamour but for privacy. High walls, security systems, a sanctuary where her children can exist outside the glare that has stalked them since birth. but the children are leaving. Maddox graduated from Yonsei University in South Korea and now works in film production. Pax, a visual artist, maintains minimal contact with Brad and focuses on his creative career. Zahara thrives at Spelman College, having legally dropped Pitt from her name. Shiloh, now 18, did the same the moment she could. A public rejection that shattered Brad and vindicated Angelina's claims of alienation, or proved his claims of parental manipulation, depending on which narrative you believe. Only the twins, Knox and Vivian at 16, remain at home, and even they are preparing for lives beyond her reach. For a woman who rebuilt herself through motherhood, watching her children grow away is both triumph and loss. She gave them everything: stability, purpose, protection, but now she must let them go. And when they leave, she will be alone in ways she hasn't been since childhood. Her health remains fragile. The hypertension requires daily medication. Her reconstructed body carries permanent limitations. She tires easily, avoids stress that could trigger another Bell's palsy episode, and lives with the knowledge that her genetic lottery isn't finished. Other cancers could still come. Professionally, she directs more than she acts now, helming films about war, injustice, and survival. Subjects she understands intimately. Her humanitarian work continues, though less visibly. She attends fewer galas, gives fewer speeches, focuses her energy on direct action rather than spectacle. Romantically, she remains single. Since Brad, there have been rumors, but no confirmed relationships. Friends say she doesn't trust easily, that the divorce left wounds too deep for casual healing. "I'm not closed to love," she has said, "but I'm also not looking for it." Her net worth sits around $120 million. Comfortable, but not the billions tabloids once claimed. Much of her wealth has gone to charity, legal fees, and supporting 6 children across multiple continents and universities. She rarely speaks publicly about Brad. The legal battle over Chateau Miraval continues, an $800 million lawsuit that refuses to die. Their divorce, filed in 2016, still isn't finalized as of 2025. 9 years of warfare with no end in sight. When asked about her legacy, Angelina doesn't mention her Oscar, her beauty, or her humanitarian accolades. She mentions her children. If they grow up to be kind, empathetic people who use their privilege to help others, then I succeeded. Everything else is just noise. Perhaps that is the truest measure of Angelina Jolie in 2025. A woman who survived a childhood that should have destroyed her, fame that nearly consumed her, a body that betrayed her, and a divorce that tried to break her, and still chooses every morning to keep fighting. Not for empire, not for applause, but for the quiet dignity of survival, for the 6 humans she brought into her life, and for the hope that suffering, if endured with courage, can eventually transform into wisdom. And now, this story turns to you. What will you take from Angelina's journey? That beauty is both gift and curse? That survival requires losing parts of yourself you can never reclaim? That motherhood can save you, but it cannot complete you? That even the most powerful, most beautiful, most celebrated among us are fragile, flawed, and fighting battles we cannot see? Angelina Jolie is not a perfect woman. She has made choices that destroyed relationships, alienated people she loved, and left scars on those closest to her. But perhaps that is what makes her story worth examining. It reminds us that survival is not about flawless triumph, but about the courage to keep standing after every fall, to love after loss, to rebuild after collapse. Share your reflections in the comments below. Subscribe for more untold stories. And join us in honoring not just the legends, but the fragile, imperfect humanity within them. Because in every scar, in every sacrifice, Angelina Jolie shows us the ultimate truth, that the greatest legacy is not beauty, fame, or power, but the strength to endure when everything you are is stripped away, and still choose to live.